Hi, my name's Andrew McIntosh, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction to what we mean by genetic studies. Within your body, within whatever body part that you look, if you zoom in with a microscope, you'll eventually come to the smallest units of life, which are the cells. So the cells are shown on this screen here. Now, if you zoom in on a cell, you'll see that there's a darker bit in the middle of each one of them called a nucleus. And in the nucleus, you would see, if you could zoom in even further, chromosomes. So chromosomes are shown on this graph, and you have 22 pairs of chromosomes and then a pair of sex chromosomes which govern whether you become male or female. Each one of these chromosomes is passed down, one from your mother, one from your father, and in each of your parents they also had chromosomes that were passed down from their mother and their father or your grandparents. And the contents of these chromosomes determine lots of things about us. They determine hair colour, eye colour, and whether we're more likely to develop some conditions or not, such as schizophrenia, depression, bipolar disorder, and many others. If you zoom in on one of those chromosomes, eventually you'll see one of the building blocks of life and how information is passed from one generation to the next. This information is carried in a chemical called DNA. And if you zoomed in still further into DNA, you'd see that it consists of a series of letters. So there's 4 letters, T, A, G, and C. And here you can see a mock-up of a sequence of DNA from somebody. Could be me, could be you, it would look very similar. And there's a series of letters. Each one of them gives some of the instructions for building cells and building the machinery of life itself. Now the sequence that you see here, T, T, A, G, 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 etc., it's not the same in everybody. We have differences in our sequence if we were to read down that sequence of letters in every individual at the same point. To give you an example, here's a different sequence. Now one of the bases here has been replaced by a letter G. Now that G causes a disease in this individual who's carrying this piece of DNA. And it's called a disease causing change, or sometimes it's referred to as a mutation. Another word that's associated with this, sometimes people refer to these as polymorphisms if they're common. But they can some of them cause disease in everybody that carries them, like cystic fibrosis, for example, or Huntington's disease might be genetic diseases that you've heard of before. And these are caused sometimes by a single change in a letter within your sequence of DNA shown on this screen. In mental illness, it's a bit different. The genetics of mental illness are significantly more complicated than things like cystic fibrosis or Huntington's disease. So I want to talk slightly about why we do genetic studies and how those genetic studies are performed. So usually what we do is identify a group of people with schizophrenia and a group of people without schizophrenia. And typically the number of people that we need in the studies runs into the thousands or tens of thousands. So usually people take blood from these individuals and then they zoom in, identifying the DNA and looking at the sequence of letters across all of their chromosomes all at the same time. So here's an example of one of the sequences that you showed earlier. So this is a person with schizophrenia and they have a sequence of letters here. And people without schizophrenia have an almost identical series of letters here. But in people with schizophrenia, this A letter here is slightly more common in people with schizophrenia than it is without people with schizophrenia. It's not a big difference. Most people have the same letter, in fact, at that point. Most people have the letter T. But in people with schizophrenia, the letter A is slightly more common. And so in this instance, the letter A would be what we say is associated with schizophrenia. It's more common in people with schizophrenia. And sometimes that can provide clues as to what the causes of schizophrenia are, or what treatments people might respond to in future. So there's a lot of us interested in this area and whether these letters tell us about what happens in people with schizophrenia, or indeed any mental illness, and how that might help us diagnose it, how it might help us treat people with the condition in future. I want to emphasize that genetic studies of mental illness are really complex. So I want you to imagine, instead of looking at a single letter, we're looking at a series of 12 letters or more, over many individuals. So I'm just going to extract 4 people here. So 2 people, person 1 and person 2, are people with schizophrenia, and there are 2 people without schizophrenia. And if you look at these individuals, each one of these little circles on the screen here represents that single base change that you see slightly more commonly in people with schizophrenia than in people without. And what you see here on this screen, where there are about 100 individual changes, is that if you look at each one of those individuals, it's very difficult to separate them out from each other. So person 1 and person 2 who have schizophrenia, you can see that there is slightly the blue circles here represent changes that occur more often in people with schizophrenia, and you can see that those bluey-green changes are more common in people with schizophrenia. But it's not really obvious, is it? They're slightly more common, but they're also common in people without schizophrenia too. So by looking at these, we now understand that the genetics of mental illness is complicated, and it isn't a genetic disease like Huntington's disease or cystic fibrosis, but it's caused by the action of many genetic changes that occur more frequently in some individuals than in others. We shouldn't also forget that there are other factors that are important in conferring risk of mental illness. So in schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, and all of the others, the environment is also important. Maybe factors that happen to people during childhood or birth, or the stress that people face during life. Genetics can tell us a little bit about those things also. So you might think of genetics and the environment as being 2 different things, but often they have to work together to lead to somebody developing mental illness in future. Thank you.